We are just trying to give people a memory and an opportunity to look back on something that will inspire them to love music for the rest of their lives. I don't think that's too much to ask for.
Welcome to Inspiring Voices, the podcast of the Sing Up Foundation. We believe in harnessing the power of singing to improve mental health and well-being for children and young people. I'm Baz Chapman, and in this first series I'll be speaking with inspirational singers, music leaders, researchers and other specialists to consider the unique role of singing, songwriting, voice exploration and creative music making in transforming young people's mental health and well-being.
Inspiring Voices, a new podcast from the Sing Up Foundation. Please remember to subscribe and leave us a review on Apple or Spotify. And we're just starting to plan season 2, so get in touch with your ideas for future topics or interviews you'd like to hear. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening. And now on with the show.
I'm delighted to be talking with David Lawrence, one of the UK's most versatile conductors, who works with orchestras and bands and choirs and choruses of all types. Pretty much put him in front of any musical group and he will be able to lead them with exceptional skill. David may be best known to our listeners as the principal conductor of the Young Voices, those arena concerts with thousands of children singing together. David, thank you for joining me.
A pleasure, Baz. Lovely to see you.
Now, we go back a few years,
We do.
and I think really started working properly together when I was chorus and projects manager at the City of Birmingham Symphony Orchestra, and you were conductor of City of Birmingham Young Voices, which was an unauditioned choir for secondary age kids in and around Birmingham. David, tell me about your memories, particularly of the young people that sang in that choir.
Oh, I look back at that now and I do still get quite emotional about it, because I genuinely think it's one of the best things I've done. And it seemed like a very bizarre thing for an orchestra to want to do. The troubles orchestras are having now with money are not new, and quite why this orchestra wanted to start an unauditioned choir for teenagers, one could only guess, but they really did, because that was where their heart was, with not just orchestral playing but also singing, of course at the highest standards with the CBSO chorus, but also very, very much within its community. So I was asked to lead this unauditioned teenage choir, and we did lots of workshops in schools to raise awareness of it in some obvious parts of Birmingham, but particularly in some less obvious parts of Birmingham. And I do remember these workshops very well. I remember one in a place called Castle Vale, which is socially deprived. Is it okay to say that?
Yeah.
Area, but those were some of the areas we headed for. We went into secondary schools, and I just led some singing with anybody who was interested, and we would gradually put together interested people. And I know that there were some singers who did join the choir very early on who had essentially never been out of Castle Vale. Not just not out of Birmingham, but not out of Castle Vale. And so to get the bus into town every Thursday night was quite a big thing for them. And it was pretty clear that they got a lot from it. And the way I discovered that was simply they turned up. They turned up not just for the first week. I always think the important thing for the choir like that is not can you get people through the door, but can you get people through the door more than once? Can you get them to come back a second time? Because then you've really started to succeed. And we did, and time again. And after you joined, the numbers of the choir grew. We kept on doing those workshops, and it was something that I don't know how possible that is now to do. We used to get members of the choir onto a bus during school time. We got them out of school and we would take them around other schools, and we would sing with large groups of singers in secondary school halls.
Picking up on the thing about travel, quite apart from the sort of the potential well-being benefits of joining a choir, so often I came across areas of Birmingham that had that thing. They were the areas that might be economically deprived, but that they might be also very low on aspiration, or they might
Yeah.
be such close communities that there wasn't a sense of needing to go sort of out of your own area. And so before you even dealt with what might be some of those sort of mental health and well-being things that we know that singing can really help with, it was just a thing of actually just having the confidence and the guts to go and get on a bus and find your way into town
Yes.
and go into a posh building that was
Yes.
occupied by a symphony orchestra and meet all these people that you didn't know from elsewhere in Birmingham. And yeah, I felt so chuffed, on behalf of
Mm.
those young people that had the confidence to do it, and that it meant enough to them to keep on doing it.
Exactly, and the best way I think we could have responded to that is the way in which we did, and that is just to make sure that what we offered them when they got there, and having been on that journey, was something really worthwhile doing, and we did do that, and that would be partly the reason they did keep on coming. You talked about the health and well-being aspects of it, which were very strong, and I'm sure that also came from not just the music and the singing, but the social interaction that it offered as well. And I know this because I'm enough Facebook friends still with a number of the singers from those early days who are very, very powerful friends still with each other. It made bonds that have been important throughout their lives. And it's really interesting because when I was standing there in front of those lovely singers, getting them to sing songs, I think I had no idea what I was doing and what I was involved with at all. I was just doing my job that I was paid to do, just inspire some singing and get it sounding as best as I could. And I had various different ways of doing that. But just looking back now, seeing how important that choir was to those people, really makes me. It sort of makes me want to tell other people about that, and to tell anybody who is conducting a choir of young people that you really don't know what you're doing. You have no idea what you are inspiring in people when you do that. You have no idea who, and it's not always the obvious ones as well, in whom you get to make that spark and then let them fly. So I think it's a really powerful message for what music can do, but in particular what teachers can do.
So now, looking back with a little more maturity, can you identify what it was that was going on? Maybe not so much socially, but musically, what was going on to make that so special for those young people?
It's a really good question. I'm certain it's related. I don't have one categorical answer. I'm certain it's related to giving them the opportunity to take part in something wonderful, in that they come to know what music making is themselves. You don't tell them that. It is something they need to discover for themselves. So we, in a sense, provide the opportunity for them to discover the interaction that is musical interaction with people. It's something that you can tell from my gobbling here, that it is actually very difficult to put into words. And almost that's the point, that when you get to make music with people, you get to know them and you get to interact with them in a way that is so fundamental. It's so human. It's spiritual, not at all, not religious, but it is from the human perspective. It is very spiritual, and that's a very wonderful thing. And to have young people to feel that, they might not know what it is and how to verbalize it. In fact, I'm almost certain they don't, because here I am at my grand old age of 57 and I still can't verbalize exactly what that is. But when you come to make music with people, it is a getting to know them on a level that I don't think anything else can provide.
Yeah.
And I think that when they get to know that and they get to feel that and desire it on a weekly basis, then there's nothing more wonderful. And it makes them want to turn up, which makes them want to turn up on time and to sing and to do their best. And that whatever the nature of the choir, one of my philosophies is that you make people want to be there by making them feel wonderful about themselves through what they do. it sounds a little bit superficial when I say it like that. But if you make people feel great and give them the opportunity and the environment in which they can feel fantastic about themselves, of course they will seek it out. They'll seek it out every week, and they'll want to be there, and they'll want to move their hockey practice in order to be at choir. That's my rather grandiose vision of it. But I can say that with some confidence because I've seen it, and I see it particularly in choirs like CBYV. And for 10 years, I ran a similar choir at the London Symphony Orchestra as well. I see it in those choirs because you see the lives transforming in front of your very eyes. You see it. You see how week to week they come in more confidently, and that's reflected in so many ways, in how long they stick around after the rehearsal chatting with each other, and of course in the sound that they make and the singing and the way they go about doing it. It's a particular privilege.
I've noticed as a choral singer myself, the way that you sing is affected by singing with other people. And I've had this kind of above and below, in the sense that I've sung alongside professionals, and I feel myself becoming a better singer when I'm with them. And I've had other people sort of flatteringly say the same thing about me. And there's something about this thing that makes us more than we can be by making it a kind of a social activity. And it's led me to sort of feel that when it comes to well-being, in some ways, it's not necessarily about the song, or it's not necessarily about a song that person might be into. It's something about the way that it works and the way it connects you with other people. So how did you choose repertoire for a group like that?
That's a good question. I mean, what I love about your question is it makes me think that actually the answer is that the repertoire is a means to an end, really. But that doesn't mean that the repertoire is not important. I think it is. And in fact, I've always said, where do standards come from? Where do standards come from, Dave? Well, they come through repertoire. You know, you get good repertoire, then you get good choirs. And I actually do believe that. But the way the music is arranged, I often slightly rearrange things for the choir so that I knew that what I was asking them to sing was within their capabilities, but also stretch them a little bit as well. So that did happen. I do remember getting it wrong a few times as well. I remember once going to CBYV and I'd done an arrangement. I'd spent all weekend on it, on the Titanic song, My Heart Will Go On. I was very pleased with how it worked out, and I handed it out on the next Thursday, and I had 2 or 3, or maybe it was 20 or 30 singers come up to me at the end and said, "Oh, David, that song, honestly." But I said, "Well, it's quite current, isn't it?" "No, David, that was like 6 months ago." I was like, "Oh, right. Okay." So my idea of what's current and what's funky and what's groovy, and that was well into running that choir, a good number of years into it, where I clearly thought I knew what I was doing, and I absolutely didn't. In terms of that, I do find sometimes when you give them the power to choose the repertoire, that can be a very powerful thing. And as you know, because you were the man who said yes to this, when I came up with this idea of doing a rock and pop concert, essentially, again, as you know, but perhaps people who are listening won't, what we did was we booked 4 of the finest musicians money can't buy, and for the concert. But up to that point, we filled the concert with music that the singers chose, and that was an absolute given. I was not going to get in the way of that. They chose the corporate songs that they sang as a choir, but they also had the opportunity to sing a solo song that they would choose, which is a kind of an interesting thing to do with an unauditioned choir, because how do you choose your soloists? Well, we didn't. We had auditions, and they weren't private auditions. Importantly, they were sung in front of the whole choir. My theory being that if they can sing in front of a group of people that they know, with the lights on, then singing in front of 200 people in the dark that they don't know will be a whole lot easier, because it's so much more difficult to sing to your friends. And so whilst the choir was auditioned and remained unauditioned, crucially, the flagship event every year was this rock and pop concert, for which they did audition in front of each other. And places to sing those solo songs were pretty hotly contested, and so many memories of those auditions, how supportive they were of each other. That was a phenomenal part. In fact, those auditions that we had, I think, were probably some of the most important and bonding in bonding moments. But it also gave me the opportunity to hear voices on their own from within a choir that I'd been conducting for years, where I'd never heard the individual voices. And oh my, some of the sounds that they make were phenomenal. Incredible. And it really gave those people an opportunity to be themselves, to choose the music. And so we would put this concert on and combine some group songs and individual songs, and some songs where the rest of the choir would be the backing vocals. And it was a very much a singer, student, member-led event. And it became a jewel, not just in the choir's crown, but in the orchestra's crown as well. And so I was very, very, very proud of that event, which wouldn't have happened if you'd also shared that vision. Because I have to say, it's great for us singing leaders to have all these highfalutin ideas about what we might want to do. But forever, anybody listening to this who's been in my position will know that if we don't have somebody like yourself at the other end of it saying, yes, I will find the N £1,000 to make that happen, then we can't do it. So that was a team effort, and I love that. I love
that. I can think of very few areas of this work where collaboration and partnership isn't really important, because going it alone is so very difficult to do, and just the load that you as a leader are taking simply in getting the musical participatory aspects of it right are challenging enough. Just a couple of things before we move on from that group. One of them was that I remember the diversity of that group, and that group was diverse not because a funder told us we had to be diverse, but because we wanted to represent the young people of Birmingham, and so both the ethnic but also the economic diversity. So there were people from independent schools and people from some of the toughest parts of Birmingham. And you're so right that thing of there somehow was that amazing camaraderie and self-support for everyone, including for those people, and I'm sure you can remember some of them, where there were clearly really big problems in their lives. There was the lad who was the sole carer for his family, for whom that choir was the only positive thing in his life. So there was the girl that self-harmed. Into that room came all of those amazing things from the melting pot of Birmingham. And out of it came amazing music. And I cannot think of any other thing where you could get that amazing sense of achievement and achievement of excellence. You're
absolutely right. When I look back at taking those rehearsals as well, apart from their uniforms, I was pretty unaware about who was from this area and who was from that area. Yes, visually and musically and socially, and in every way that choir was diverse. I would go as far as to say the orchestra's most diverse group that it had at the time, and possibly ever. And that was just a wonderful nature of it. And to see them all being one, sounding as one, but then existing as one was really the greatest thrill. And I'm sure that diversity of experience as well as background and culture came out in the richness of the sound. I mean, there we were, this unauditioned group from in inner city Birmingham. And we got some of the most extraordinary opportunities. We got people asking us to go and sing at Commonwealth Day at Westminster Abbey. We got invited to Buckingham Palace to go and sing at a day where the Queen was celebrating music. The fact, she famously was not a huge music lover herself, but she went out of her way to allow us all to celebrate music. And we got invited to perform in the throne room. And I've got pictures of those singers from. And to remind people listening, remember, some of these singers had never been out of their small part of Birmingham where they grew up. There they were in the Long Gallery of Buckingham Palace, having lunch and chatting to the Queen. I mean, How? I defy anybody to answer. How does it get better than that? Well, they were very, very lucky. They knew it and they responded well.
Yes. But also, I think I would say that they were there not because they were a diverse choir. They were there because the energy that they had on stage was something amazing. And that was to do with the circumstances, the quality of the leadership, the fact that, yes, it had the backing of an organisation, well, two, in fact, because it was part funded by Birmingham Music Service. But, I think back to the Jubilee performance that they did when they did do Christmas concerts with the orchestra and did things like the Soulful Messiah Hallelujah chorus. It was kind of, it's not that they didn't care, but they didn't allow anything to get in their way of delivering their top performance.
Absolutely right. And I remember from those Christmas concerts that you mentioned, I remember the reaction that they got very often from the CBSO chorus. Let's not forget, an auditioned adult, the finest symphonic chorus. They absolutely loved CBYV, and they would not tire of telling us, would they, about how they loved not just what they sing, but how they went about doing it. And you talked about the freedom and about how they went about it. They just didn't know any other way. I certainly learned a lot about how you lead groups like that and how you get the best out of them, and concluded that it's not about conducting. It's all to do with how you make somebody who's at that stage in their life. Being a teenager was never easy. And being a teenager now, I think, is particularly difficult for so many other reasons. But why I found that age group, and I've always said throughout my career, I've always said that conducting teenage choirs, that is my favourite age group, and the reason is because I find it the most challenging, because the challenge is more psychological. It's much more about how they think, about from the leader's perspective. How do you do it? You just have to find a way to influence how they think about themselves. And then you encourage them to want to be there and want to work. But you try to understand how a teenager thinks about themselves and to get them to think outside of themselves, because it's a very, it's a thing where you go through a lot of changes psychologically, and often the world shrinks, and you become very inside yourself. And singing in a choir is a weekly opportunity to get outside yourself. And yes, some of them would undoubtedly say that they struggled with that, but also that they hugely benefited the opportunity to be more than they were. And you said something really good just then about how they could take part in something that is more than just the sum of the parts. I can't quite remember how you phrased it, but it was absolutely brilliantly put, because that is the opportunity singing in a choir affords people, particularly at that stage in life, which is never easy.
So, no, absolutely. So let's go this from a broader scope of ages of children and young people, and maybe into the minds of someone who is leading singing in a school. Maybe they're the music specialist, or maybe there's someone who's got a little bit of kind of skill and experience but doesn't feel like they're a particular expert. But they might identify that singing is something which seems to do good. It seems to be good for their young people to come together. What might be your sort of top tips or areas of guidance for them? Is it about choosing repertoire with the right lyrics, or is it about something sort of a bit deeper than that, which can bring about those great outcomes without necessarily having to have David Lawrence come in and work your magic for you?
Yes. Well, what I would say is, as much as I don't want to do myself out of doing any work at all, I would say one of the primary ways is not to get David Lawrence into your school to do it. I used to do many singing projects for orchestras, opera companies, and this is pre-Young Voices, and fabulously loved it, of course. My first ever large-scale singing things. Well, when I say large scale, 300 singers. That was a really big choir. It is a really big choir, let's be honest. For Leicestershire Music and for Birmingham Music Service, were really great. And it would involve me going around the schools, teaching the music to the singers. Of course it would. But actually, it wasn't long before I realised that if I carry on doing that, then am I potentially giving the impression that singing is for special people that come into your schools? And so all the big school singing projects that I've done from that point onwards, when that sort of moment of realization dawned, and I suddenly thought, oh my goodness me, here I am trying to achieve one thing, but am I, that singing is for everybody, but am I unwittingly giving completely the opposite message by going into schools? And doing it. So whenever I do that now, I try to work more closely with the teachers and facilitate and encourage them to do the leading and to do the singing. And very often, well, there are some things that I meet quite a lot. Firstly, if I ever use the word conducting, that they might conduct their children, they recoil in horror and say, "Oh, well, I'm not a conductor. I'm just a music teacher." I said, "Well, do you sometimes find your way? Do you sometimes find yourself in front of your singing group, moving your arms?" Well, yes, of course. Well, I said, "Look, that is conducting." So we find ways of maximizing that communication. I actually believe that for a young person to see their teacher struggling with something with which they're not particularly comfortable is a really wonderful lesson, because that, much more so than me going into a school doing blah 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 blah, that, I think, is something that says music is for everybody, even people who struggle with it. Look, there's my teacher doing their best. I think they're far more likely to. It might be a more longer term outcome, but I think that gives the message that singing is for everybody much more easily. So I love nothing more than to be in the position of encouraging teachers to do this and to do it with more confidence. Another thing that I hear very often, "Oh, my voice is not so great." And again, I think that it doesn't matter. Not only does it not matter that you haven't got a wonderful singing voice, I think it's fantastic that the children get to hear you, with being a bit rough around the edges. What's wrong with that? All it's showing is that you're human and you are trying to do something that you believe in. Can there be a better lesson for a young person? I don't think so. So that's my approach now of doing these big things. And so more to your question, how can a teacher who's in that position optimize what they do? Yes, choosing good arrangements is. And good music for young people. It really is key, but wonderfully now there is so much more that's available than there used to be in terms of all of that tried and tested repertoire. And also lots and lots of new repertoire as well. But there are plenty of places you can go. Sing Up, not least Sing Up, which did such a fantastic job in making very carefully thought through arrangements available for schools to find repertoire. And then I think the main thing, apart from getting the children in the hall, is just to have the chutzpah to press play and go for it and do it, and not to worry about how you sound, and then to just find in yourself the confidence to get up and sing in front of your children. Young voices, I do get the chance to meet some of the teachers. They're all invited to take part in these teacher workshops that we do, which has now become a really big thing. We see about a third of them, I think, a third of the schools represented at the workshops. We'd love to have them all there, of course. But that gives me a chance to meet the teachers up close and personal, which otherwise I would never have the opportunity to do, but also share with them some of these philosophies and encourage them to feel confident in leading the music. Because whilst I know you mentioned music specialists, and the school that has one, I think these days is a very charmed school, because there really aren't many music specialists. There are music coordinators, of course. But within my lifetime, music specialists became music coordinators because, sadly, all those fantastic music education departments at places like Warwick University and Reading and Exeter just sort of slightly disappeared. And so we weren't making music teachers anymore. So now, how does a teacher do it? A teacher who's become a music coordinator in the school, how do they do it? There are so many networks online, Facebook groups, and organisations like Sing Up that are out there to support. And but I think primarily just having the courage to sing in front of your children. That would be my number one thing, to do that, and to not worry about how you sound. That's where I would start.
There is it seems that certainly in our, I don't know whether you could call it Western culture, but there feels like this thing of a fear around singing, or a fear of being judged. and which seems to get in the way of both young people and adults sometimes. And if you can only just get
You're
past
absolutely
that
right.
and normalise it, the world's your oyster, isn't it?
You're so right, and that's very much related to where we started this conversation. I think when we talked about what is it that binds singers together, what is that special thing that we can't really verbalise at all, and it is something very much inside us that makes us who we are, and this is where I think singing and conducting are slightly separate from all other forms of music making. That sounds rather grand, but they are the two forms of music making that exclusively use your body and nothing else. Every other form of music making, you pick something up and hit something, or you scrape something along, or you blow down it, or whatever it is. But singing and conducting simply use your human body. And when you're singing and when you're conducting and somebody perhaps criticizes you, you have to be very clear that it is potentially your singing, conducting that's being criticized, and not you as a person being criticized. And that distinction is very, very crucial. And I think that is why when people sing, they do feel like when they're being listened to, they feel like they're being judged, not even criticized, but simply listened to, they feel judged. And that's a very good way. The way you put that, I think, is absolutely right. And we just need to get over that. And not worry about what people might say or what people might think about our singing voice. I've had teachers come up to me at the beginning of insets and say, before you start, I don't sing and I won't sing. So don't give me this singing is for everybody kind of a larky. And the blockage is like brick wall. And I can't say that I've always succeeded at all with that. But the wall is built internally. And if there is a wall like that, it's just for us to break it down. And I think that the first best way to do that is just give it a go. Give it a go and try.
Have you had any examples of that where you very clearly did break down a wall from someone who had built it up in front of you? I'd love to know how you did it.
I used to teach conducting quite a bit in summer schools and different places, and I've had students who have not been able to do things, or and maybe it's just simply to communicate a musical idea, and then to somehow facilitate that to happen, despite the fact that they'd absolutely got it in their minds that this was how they do things and that they couldn't possibly change. To then see them change and to see them do something non-verbally and elicit a different response out of a group of singers, had them burst into tears because they've never realized that was possible. To make that musical connection through doing something with your arms and then you hear it with your ears. That again is related. We'll have to theme this this talk now. We'll have to find a word for the non-verbal, the thing that we can't quite verbalize. There almost is nothing better than when you do something there with your arms and then you hear it different in the voices, because that communication is one that you can't put a price on, really, and you can't do in any other way. I've seen conductors try to talk their choirs into being better choirs by asking for this and asking for that, and there's a different part of your brain that responds to verbal instruction, and when you respond to something that you see visually, and then as a conductor, when you do something here and you hear it different out there, it is extraordinary. So I had a wonderful teacher in Doreen Rouse, very lucky to study with her, initially just for a week, out in Chicago in the mid-90s, and where she would talk about encouraging the singers to do the doing. So taking the responsibility away from the conductor, and encourage she talked about encouraging the artist in every child, and that you can't talk somebody into being more artistic or more musical or more vocal, but you can show them. And what it does is it moves the responsibility from the conductor on to the singers in order to respond, and that's where I learned the very powerful distinction between teaching and learning. And I love nothing more than to be with a group of 10 and 11-year-olds or whatever age, and I do some song and I'll make some banal comment like, I haven't got time to teach you the actions, but you've just got enough time to learn them. And there's this kind of weird silence. They're like, oh, he hasn't got time to teach us, but we've got time to learn them. What is that? And then I'll say, who can tell me what the difference between teaching and learning is? And you know what? Without fail, the responses that you get are very deep. I mean, they might verbalize it in a very straightforward way, but they know that when you're being taught something, then there is somebody else involved. But that when you're learning it, you're doing it for yourself. And that is why it was that great American educational philosopher said that nobody can teach anybody anything. All we can hope to do is put people in the environment in which they learn. And that's what good teachers do. They simply encourage learning. And it's what good conductors do as well. And that encourages, I think, it encourages us to, again, it goes back to something we were saying earlier about about putting the responsibility on the singers to want to do their best. We create an environment in which singers want to do their best, and then our job is easy. It's like freewheeling and plain sailing. It really is. I think when conducting gets difficult, it's when we have to do all the work, and it's rarely the case that we do have to do all the work. We just think we have to do all the work, and the best conductors I've seen working, and of course I've worked with many, often as a chorus master, preparing choirs for them to conduct. The best conductors are the ones who do the least very often, or at least save it for the performance, because they know where the singing comes from. You know?
Yeah. Now, the National Teachers Choir is a group that Sheila Webber and I set up in 2015, and you are a patron of that group. And it's very interesting seeing the reflections for them on the process of teaching and learning in a choir. It's really, obviously it's great for them because they can just give all of that responsibility to somebody else, just teaching. And yet, I think this very much picks up on your philosophy of there's something about the process which is far more than a person standing in front of you saying you must do this. There's something to do with this kind of group, a sense of creativity, a sense of moulding your own kind of sound. When you came and worked with us, which was just when we were emerging out of lockdown, wasn't it? There were moments for that which were really quite profound for you, weren't they? Can you say a bit about that?
I'll try
and hold it together.
Have to edit all the try and hold it together, David. It was the first time I'd heard live singing together since before lockdown. Something that I think something that I'd taken for granted, that there would always be choirs and that there would always be singing and that there would always be work and that there would always be income. When that suddenly wasn't true anymore, it was absolutely devastating. And then to hear it again for the first time, it was very special. I'll forever ever remember that weekend. We had some lovely music, of course. And just I'm thinking in the back of my head, I said something earlier that people would have every right to question about that group. I said, well, of course it's a special group. Why would it always be a special group? It's a group of music teachers who are my favourite population. Especially music teachers on a day off from school. So the Young Voices Teachers Workshops, they are wild and fun. Of course, are terribly important, and there's lots of hard work and learning. But it's all done through the fact that everybody is there for the same reason and motivated by the same things. And so here's a choir of not just music teachers, I feel certain. I mean, you can perhaps correct me, but I'm sure some of them are generalist teachers, perhaps teachers of other subjects as well. But I think it's fantastic, a fantastic idea that this group. So that's one reason why it's special, because of the natural makeup of its membership. But also, I know Ula well enough to know that she's a very emotive person. She feels music very deeply, and as a result, I know encourages other people to do that. And so they're on not a cerebral, intellectual basis, but they will always sing from the heart, because that's where their conductor conducts from. Yeah. If you sing thoughtfully and with your mind, then you'll be lucky enough to reach the mind of the audience. But if you sing from your heart, then you stand a chance of reaching their heart as well. And that's where their leader comes from. And so, that's another reason why that group is particularly special. And I'm deeply proud to be their patron. Deeply.
I think the coming out of lockdown for me, the first time I sang, which I think was with Ex Cathedra, it's a choir in Birmingham. Actually, it was harmony that did it for me. It was because you do all of these things online and they're great, but being with other people and creating harmony, there's something that goes on in the body that responds to that. And what I love about that is that harmony is not difficult to teach or learn. There are so many tools and songs and things that mean that you can get people singing in harmony, and it's harmony gets used as a word to represent so many things about the way that people interact in a positive way. So why not actually make that happen musically, because it does really work. And I think that weekend with National Teachers Choir, their harmony with themselves and with you was, you could tell there was the magic. There was kind of it's to a degree, it didn't matter what they were singing about. The fact that they were there singing together had its own power.
Yes.
Now then, so let us talk about Young Voices, this phenomenon that has swept, well, not just the UK over the last 20-something years. Tell me about, why is Young Voices special? Because you think, something on that scale is not going to be a deep experience for an individual child, and yet it seems like it is.
That's a really great question, and I've had other people of great experience say to me, how can that possibly be musical when you get 9,500 children together in one room and you try and make them sing? How can that be a musical experience? And it's a very valid and a very good question, to which, as you would expect, I have some answers. So Young Voices does look like it's about the scale of it, and anybody coming to a Young Voices concert will no doubt be hugely impressed by how it looks as well as how it sounds. I've been conducting it since its third year here. And essentially, we give out a bunch of music to anybody, any school. It's not just schools, it's mostly schools. It can be community youth choirs. We give them the resources with which they can teach, or in the context of our conversation today, encourage their children to learn the repertoire for the concert. And the repertoire for the concert is in three kind of types. We do some medleys of songs, and we do individual songs. And we also have the opportunity to sing alongside guest artists as well. So we have artist songs too. And they learn about 55 minutes of music, I think, and the concerts last an hour and 45 with all the huge applause. We have a dance group who accompany some of the songs and also have their moments with everybody. So it's all about the children. They are absolutely, as we constantly remind them, they are the stars of the concert, and we make them so. So we choose good songs, that's what we think, and our amazing music director puts some fantastic medleys together, and I get involved just making sure that the vocal arrangements are good, that the keys are right for the children, and generally, I'll tell you what that means. That means me making sure that they are high enough. Because a lot of the music that we sing is popular contemporary style. It's not always. The music director and I were both classically trained, and it's one of our great conceits to try to get them to sing music. We did a whole medley of pop songs recently, but did they know they were singing Bach and Pachelbel and Tchaikovsky and Borodin? Perhaps they didn't. Well, of course, we made it clear that these could be leaps into other genres. So we keep it as broad as we possibly can. That's very important to us. I mean, so look, here's a little inside story that I haven't really ever made public. After my first year with Young Voices, it wasn't called that then, but after my first year, we sat down and we talked, and they said, David, what can we do better? And I said, well, in all the the big singing projects I've done with orchestras and music services and opera companies, we always get the teachers together and go through the music so that we're all starting from the same place. Well, of course, that's impossible, David. We've got teachers in Newcastle and we've got teachers in Bristol. We can't possibly get them together. Have you got any other ideas? And of course, I had a few. And I kept banging on about these teacher workshops. And again, this again goes back to something that you and I talked about earlier, about how people like me depend on people like you. And it took a man called Dan, who's one of our managers, to come along and just when he joined and heard me banging on about teacher workshops, he said, well, that's exactly what we should do. And now these teacher workshops, we do 6 or 7 a year. Not only are these teacher workshops a really important part of our year, and I enjoy them as much as the concerts, I have to say, but they also they raise money for what we've called the Young Voices Foundation, and a significant amount of money as well, which is wonderful, because what that does is it helps schools who can't afford to take part. So the thing that inspires me about Young Voices is not the scale. And there's some fantastic pictures. I mean, anyone will just have to Google it to discover it. And I love showing people pictures of the the front top of my Twitter is one of these pictures from one of the concerts. And when I can't describe, I say, well, look, it looks a bit like that. And their jaw hits the floor. They go, wow! And you're that little white dot. Yeah. So I'm very proud of all of that and about how it looks and how it sounds. And that's a whole other question. I mean, how do you get it to sound good? And how do you get, those lights? But we have a wonderful team to organise that. But what really inspires me about it is not the fact that one day I go to work and I conduct nearly 10,000 people at all. It's the individual stories that I get back afterwards, that you hear sometimes years down the line about how it's inspired. Again, going back to what we were talking about earlier about how music can inspire people. You never know what you're inspiring. There was one guest artist that we've had who went on to win a program called The Voice. And she was our guest artist for a year. And she had a fantastic story to tell, particularly when she got to the O2 Arena. She told it in every arena, but she was inspired to sing by taking part in a Young Voices concert, and she pointed to the seat where she sang. And she said, when I was 8, I sang in one of these concerts, and it really made me want to sing and to be on this stage, and here I am. And the message is fantastic. The message is, one day it could be you. I mean, I think that's a very powerful message. Of course, we're not trying to create 200,000 winners of The Voice a year. That's absolutely not what we're trying to do. We are just trying to give people a memory and an opportunity to look back on something that will inspire them to love music for the rest of their lives. I don't think that's too much to ask for. On our 25th year of doing these concerts, we specifically asked at every concert that if you do have a Young Voices story, as a parent or as a teacher or as a child, send it in. So of course we were inundated with them. But this one parent had a blog which she used to update every now and again. There's nothing to do with music, in fact. But it was all about Young Voices. She said, it was something like, I'd had a terrible day at work. I'd been so busy with various things overrunning with my business and what have you. And then I had to go to this school concert with my son. And I really wanted, I didn't want to do that at all. And I had to rush, and I got there and I picked him up at the end. And from the back of the car, this is what he said. Mum, when I'm really old, and I'm about to die, I will remember today as the best day of my life. And we were reading this the next day in the canteen. And I remember the phone was being passed around, and people were just falling one by one, because we're all of a certain age now. And we just thought, this is so blinking wonderful what we are doing, and what we are able to do through doing this project. And so, it is stories like that make me that constantly want to play my part in Young Voices, which of course looks to everybody like it's conducting the concerts, but I'm involved all through the year in helping to do my part in whatever way I can to make it what it is.
Yeah, and I think what intrigues me, and maybe why the where you get asked that kind of, how can this be educational or whatever, is that you can have those young people for whom there's that kind of spark of inspiration that could lead them into amazing places. But even if you're someone who's not necessarily a particularly enthusiastic singer, you go along to be part of it, and you're lifted into this experience, which is very deeply musical, but is something to do with being amongst a host of people doing the same thing. One of my podcast guests said, actually nobody would wage war on each other if they'd sung together. And there's this thing about bringing people together to sing has this just extraordinary impact that yes, you really do take with you. And it's very...
Somebody once put it to me in a much more blunt way. They said if you sing next to somebody, they're much less likely to punch you. And perhaps there are some choirs where that's not the case. I don't know, but it is exactly right. So surely, therefore, the more singing we can get going of quality, then the less punching there's going to be in this world. And I think that's absolutely right, because it infects how people feel about themselves as people.
All right, so we'll draw it to a close, but I'm going to finish by asking you something I've asked all my guests, which is a particularly inspiring vocal moment for you from some point in your life.
I was at Warwick University, as you know, and sang in the CBSO chorus, the organisation with which we made that wonderful youth choir where we started talking about. And I sang there, and initially it was just their chorus master, who was my music director, the wonderful Simon Housey, without whom I would not be here, because he was my third amazing music teacher. I just got very lucky with my music teachers. I referred to Ian Thompson. I'm going to name them, and Adrian Boynton at secondary school, and then Simon Housey at university. I just got very lucky. But Simon was looking around for some extra tenors to sing in Mahler's Second Symphony with Simon Rattle. This was in the mid-'80s. Properly dated me now. And he got very excited about talking about Simon Rattle. I'd never heard of Simon Rattle. Who was he? But the way Simon Housey would talk about him was like he was God's gift. Well, I now do believe him to have been a gift from God to us all, because I'm going to say that singing in those recordings and in those performances was absolutely standout and seminal for me, because that's when I found that singing in a huge choir, but singing with quality, that is a feeling that cannot be replaced by anything else. And I think it's developed from singing in that amazing chorus, in the CBSO chorus, that you could get that intimacy, but you could also get the grandeur and splendor of so many different sounds by singing in a big group. That really, really taught me that the way to get a good sound and is to optimize the input of each person. So look, if you've got, let's do some maths. My degree is maths. If you've got a choir of 30 people, it's reasonable that the responsibility is shared equally between them all, isn't it? So that would give them 3.3% responsibility each. So surely if you've got a choir of 100, you've got only 1% responsibility each. Well, no, here's the thing. That in a group of any size, be it 9, an ensemble, or 90, a choral society, or a big singing day with 900, or a young voices choir of 9,000. The way to optimize the sound is to encourage people each to take 100% of the responsibility. Now, initially, that's quite scary, because if you stand there and think to yourself, actually, if I don't come in now, it's not going to happen. Of course, you've got friends to rely on. But if you stand there and believe that your voice counts and that the responsibility on your shoulders is absolutely optimized at 100%, then you get a really great sound. And not only is it wonderful to listen to, but it's much more wonderful to take part in when you know your voice counts. And so my experience singing with the CBSO chorus really taught me that. And it's one that's fueled my philosophy ever since. And that's why conducting a young voices choir of 9,000 doesn't faze me at all. In fact, standing on that box, it is my happy place, as I've often described it. And that's because the way I approach it is to find ways of making people feel that their voice counts, that they are really important to the whole process. there's other superficial things I have to do. I have to keep them busy and not let their concentration wander. But I have to also really, really listen and find out what is going on, because one day is not the same as the next day in that choir. That's a whole other discussion. But yes, I'm going to just say I can't think of apart from those. I did so much with the CBSO chorus as a lowly second tenor. But I think I that's where I learned that that singing in a choir is about assuming responsibility, and that's what I've tried to pass on. That's what I tried to pass on to CBYV, and that's why I think they responded well, because they felt important. And my goodness me, of course they are. Not just important singers, but they're important people, and the humanity of singing is the thing that drives me above and beyond, even how it sounds. But the fact that it does bring people together in the way that it does it, I think, is extraordinary.
Well, David, it's been so fascinating talking to you as ever. And one of the things that's really, really come across to me in this is we know that there are some conductors, some even famed for having very large egos. And I think what you've demonstrated here is that to make it work in this field, for people to really get something huge from that experience of singing together, by all means, personality and charisma and energy are really important. But ultimately, as you said, it's not about you. It's about the young people that are getting it from you. And that stuff about you only works if you are then projecting it onto those young people and empowering them with some sense of the skill and responsibility that you have. And I hope that has inspired others to feel that this isn't about you have to be the most incredible person. You just need to be someone who shares that love and that knowledge of the power of this work. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Baz. No, it's great to speak with you and have this opportunity, and it's lovely for me to be able to talk about these things as well, because so often we are talking about the non-verbalizable. And look at that! I finished our little chat with a completely made-up word, but that is the joy of it, that you can't describe. You cannot describe what it is like until you get people into that singing situation.
This is Inspiring Voices, the podcast of the Sing Up Foundation. Join us for the rest of the series on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts and other major platforms. You can also watch the video of each episode on the Sing Up Foundation YouTube channel.
Inspiring Voices, a new podcast from the Sing Up Foundation. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please remember to subscribe and leave us a review on Apple or Spotify. Season 1 of Inspiring Voices was funded as part of the cultural recovery funding that Sing Up and the Sing Up Foundation received. Thanks to Arts Council England for their support.